Hello, welcome to another Coaching Conversations with Leadership Systems. Coach, I'd love to hear some of the coaching lessons that you've pulled from all the years that you've been coaching, over 30 years that you've been doing this as a profession. There's a lot of stuff that I'm sure you've seen is consistent.
Michael, it's a good question. There are some key observations, and you asked me the other day to give them some thought. So I have three surface that I do actually see a lot in my interactions with a lot of these senior leaders. The first is there's almost always a segment of needing to talk about life balance, balance at home, you name it. Along with the corporate goals that they might be working on, they almost always want to talk, especially today with pressure that's on in terms of a pandemic and all the other challenges and distractions, the need to spend and understand how to have better life balance. That's probably the most common. Another one that's very popular is the movement from doer to delegator. I see a lot of our leaders that have been doing it very well. They're successful job. They're performing. Maybe they're the highest performer in the team. Then they get promoted to manager or delegator, or maybe even to VP. And now they just can't get their hands in and be doing it as much. They have to do it sort of in a managerial mindset, or what we call a coaching mindset, do it more from a distance rather than hands-on. That's a tough transition. But the third one, and probably the most significant one, is what we call the decades of development. It's kind of understanding the phases that a person goes through, and really from this survival, phase one, up through success, kind of phase two. But then they get into this phase three of significance. And that's where it really seems to get fascinating and important, because if you don't solve that, then really problems can result.
But as a coach, I hear buzzwords that come out of those three things, and significance is a big one. So we can maybe talk about those first two at another coaching conversation. Sure. But let's dig in a little bit on that idea of you said decades of development. That seems like a big shift there in those three situations. Talk a little bit more about this. Are those related to age, specific roles, other key factors that come into play?
Yes, generally, age is one of the indicators. For instance, but not always. You can see it kind of shift depending on the maturity and maybe the education of the individual and what they've experienced. But generally speaking, the first bucket or phase is survival. A person's getting together, starting the new job, maybe, keeping the first job, maybe they're even starting their family. There's a lot going on. Really, they're thinking about mainly the weekend and getting through the week and keeping the job and just surviving. And so that's fine. That's where probably a first leader, first job person should be, kind of getting up and getting started. So we call that survival. Secondly, if they're doing well for a period of time, they get into the phase of what we call success. So maybe they're promoted, maybe they've been given an increase in salary and they've got more money than they've ever had before. Sometimes it involves a geographical move, sometimes not, but they're just doing better, and they're able to not worry about keeping the job, but they're more finding their groove and settling in, and sometimes sooner than they expect. Here's the thing that I hear a lot in coaching is they'll say, I'm really doing better than I anticipated this time in life. I'm making more money than I ever have. Things like that tend to indicate they're in the success phase. And that runs, generally speaking, maybe, let's say the survival is around the 20s, the success is more into the early 30s, but then late 30s, early 40s, certainly by the mid 40s, comes that decade of significance. And that's a big shift.
So a big shift, and when you just mentioned maybe it's not necessarily specific 10-year decades, but just major, chunks of time, and there's a big shift that happens, when you're shifting from one to the other. Is this something as some mid-ish 30s?
Right.
Is this something that, at a midlife point, there's a major shift that happens, or what does that look like?
Well, it's a fair question, because it is a little bit marked by years, but it's more marked by, I would say, maturity, and it's also marked by whether you have asked and answered the midlife question.
Okay.
So the midlife question tends to be, so what is significance to me? Mm-hmm. If that goes unanswered, it can really result in a midlife crisis. If it's well answered, it results in a pretty solid career and pretty good balance at home. And it's a life of not only significance, but with no regrets. So yes, it can be marked by age. Generally, you'll see this in late 30s, early 40s. If not answered by about 45, then you begin to see someone slide into what's known as a midlife crisis. They never quite figured out what was significant for them. They just stayed at the treadmill, so to speak. They did well. They made a lot of money. But as they hit their late 40s and early 50s, they look back and they say to me, Jim, I've done well in my career, but it seems like I missed something. It seems that something's really missing. I don't really know what it is. And so we begin to talk about, well, what's significance for you and how do you play that out with the family, which is also often something around that family connection and their purpose in life. And if they don't get that question answered well, that's when they have the regrets and sometimes a midlife crisis. Often they'll go out and buy a brand new sports car, and they might trade in family members and do things that sometimes is very unfortunate for their own good, because they're desperately trying to find the significance that they never saw earlier in their career.
It seems as it's chronological, starting with survival, going through success, and then finding that significance. I feel like I'm hearing a little bit of there's a lot of value in the sooner you can get to that place of recognizing certain significance and having that be your focus,
Yes,
the more effective you're going to
absolutely.
be in all walks of life.
Absolutely. So the people that seem to figure it out sooner are those that, quite honestly, have either had a really good mentor or they had some coaching along the way that opened up the door to ask and answer that question. These people often are just really clear about where they're going and have a much more focused purpose, and they don't have the confusion or even the fuzziness that can come with just not being certain about their life's purpose. When you have a good conversation with them, they'll usually have a couple things in place. One is they can clearly state a purpose. They can tell you what significance is for them. And the best of the best have actually had good documents. They've been able to write out this thing and present it to me, and it's just real impressive when you see it. But that's pretty rare, I have to.
So we probably have people that are watching this that may be in each of these decades of development, some that are watching from survival, some from success, some that are maybe in transition between these fundamental shifts, and maybe some that are trying to find that significance. Briefly, what's maybe a couple of quick action steps that they could take if they're in that place where they want to and get to the next decade, the next position? They're certainly try to find significance. What's something that they could do from right now?
Well, I think the first thing to do is really ask yourself, what is significant to me? What is my long-term life goal, and what would help me as I work my job, as I lead my family, as I take care of myself? Where do I really want to go in life? I think it's really fundamental. But another tool that might help along the way, we often recommend the book. It's been out for decades, but it's a classic called Halftime by Bob Buford. Halftime Ask and Answers helps people with this, what is really significant. And so he kind of frames it up that, you run really hard toward survival and success for the first half of life, and then somewhere about the middle, a little bit about where you are, you start asking, okay, how do I want it to play out from here on? So it's a good book, a good resource. Secondly, there's a book that we offer a lot called Margins. It was written by a physician. This Dr. Swinson helps people think through, how do you live life, not just totally on the go, meetings back to back, but how do I have a little margin, a little break, if you will, planned between phone calls or meetings or between work and getting home. We're a culture without margins. And in the older days, I'd say early America at least, especially if you had to go internationally, you'd be on a boat for several weeks, if you will, and it took a while to get from one place to the other. Or even long train rides, very normal in the early American culture. They're non-existent today. Everything's real time and probably too compressed. A third resource is a book written by C. Michael Thompson. He's a friend of mine, also an executive coach and an attorney. So with his vast experience, wrote a couple books. One is called When Your Foundations Move. He talks about three basic buckets of life. It's similar to what we're talking about, survival, success, significance, but he talks about them a little bit different way, but I like the way he challenges us to think about what actual phase we're in and how to manage that successfully. But I would say, Michael, the best thing to do is get a little coaching. Of course, we're big on that, but it really takes, I think, a trained ear to truly listen, to reflect back, to hear where that person is, to ask them some of the key questions, to get him or her to think through am I really, where do I need to be, and what will help me get there. And so I would say that might be one extra resource. Certainly a mentor, a very close friend, or maybe a coach to do some short-term focusing so that you live a life of significance and not regret.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. We'll do another one of these, I'm sure, to get back into life balance and doer to delegator, all those great things. If you've been listening to this and heard, obviously you heard the word question quite a bit. If you ever spend any time with Coach Jim Smith, you're going to hear the word question all the time because questions are really important. So if you're in a place right now where you say, I'd love to get some coaching, I need to be asked some really good questions to help identify what significance means for me, check out our website, leadershipsystems.com. There are lots of coaching options and packages for you. Maybe you're looking at how you can impact your team by using questions. We'd love to help you learn how you can become a coach or add the coaching skills to your leadership toolbox so that you can be an effective leader. Maybe find that significance within your team as well as within family and all the other facets of your life.
Hey Michael, how about this? If they have listened to the video and they are interested in knowing more, not only checking out the website, but if you'll connect with us, give us a call or fill out an information sheet there on the website, we'd be willing to send you a small book that I wrote about coaching that might help you think about some of these key questions and know how to move you from where you are to where you'd like to be.